From the Oklahoman newsroom, it's time for Thunder Thursday. I'm Jenny Carlson here with our Thunder coverage team, columnist Barry Trammell, Thunder beat writers Eric Horn and Brett Dawson. And guys, season starts next week with camp, so Thunder Thursday is back. It's time to get going and talk about all things Thunder. I know Eric's fired up. Guys,
I'm fired up.
Well, before we talk about the Thunder, we have to talk about Kevin Durant. Sorry, folks, this is just the way it has to be, because the former Thunder standout, guys, he can't quit talking, tweeting, commenting about the Thunder. Brett, most recently, a fan, who Eric will talk about this in a second, a fan tweets at Durant saying, essentially, why'd you leave? And looks to be that he's tweeting in the third person, like he thought he was tweeting from a different account or trying to cover his tracks or who knows what, but basically says, you know, it was just me and Russ. Billy Donovan, not who I wanted to play for. What do you make of all this, Brett?
Well, Jimmy likes Elaine, and KD doesn't like Billy Donovan, I guess, apparently, because he was the weird third person tweeting indicates that probably Kevin Durant was trying to tweet that from an account that wasn't his, but that's not what he owned up to. He owned up to saying those things about Billy Donovan and about the organization and about those cats, the other players besides him and Russell Westbrook, who he said he couldn't win a title with. Debatable. He got a 3-1 lead on the Warriors with those cats. So he's been very remorseful about saying it. Whether he's remorseful about actually what he said or getting caught saying it is, I think, sort of open to interpretation. But I think the larger point here is it's probably time for Kevin Durant to stop talking about this. Pick a story for why he left Oklahoma City and stick with it, because both parties need to move on. The Thunder certainly do, and this is a thing where I think Kevin Durant would have been out of the conversation leading into the season, at least, at Media Day, leading up to the first couple days of practice, and yet he's been a big centerpiece of the conversation again because he's inserted himself back into it.
We'll dive in a little bit more to what happened here and what might be behind Durant's comments in a second, but Eric, I mentioned that this wouldn't have happened if not for a fan question. You caught up with said fan. He happens to be a 16-year-old high school kid. Who is this guy, and what does he have to say about all of this?
Well, you know, Cole Cashwell was actually 15 when he sent the text. I mean, not the text, the tweet. He just had his 16th birthday on Monday, and he sent this tweet to Kevin Durant after playing some NBA 2K18. He was like, "Oh, I'm just going to get on Twitter." And he sent this tweet to Kevin Durant, to which Kevin Durant replied, whether or not he meant to, like Brett said, from his KD official Kevin Durant account or somewhere else. It ended up being a big story. And, you know, this kid has kind of been thrown into it as this catalyst for Kevin Durant being as honest about his departure from Oklahoma City as he's ever been. And, you know, sometimes it doesn't take a seasoned journalist to break one of the biggest stories of the year. It just takes somebody asking a question at a time where Kevin Durant wakes up from a nap and feels compelled to tweet things that really don't make logical sense if you really think about it. And that's the biggest thing for me, the biggest takeaway from Kevin Durant's tweets. Not the fact that he copped up to it, which is fine, you know, cool. Not the fact that he disparaged the organization, which if he had problems with the organization, that's fine. But you know, some of the stuff he said just don't make logical sense. He had guys that were plenty capable of winning a title. He had a coach who made proper adjustments within the course of a series to put Golden State in a hole that they haven't been in the 3 years of dominance they've been in the NBA. So to me, the things that Kevin Durant said made less sense than the actual act of him tweeting the things he said.
Barry, as Eric said, Kevin Durant did own up, said it was childish, said it was idiotic. Does any of that matter in your mind at this point?
No. Here's what I don't know. Why is Kevin Durant so insecure? That's what I don't get. I don't know. I'm asking you guys. You guys know as well as I do. Why is he so insecure? I mean, he's widely loved in some ways still in Oklahoma. They're mad at him. They want to throw things at him, but wildly loved all over the world, really. He's an NBA champion now. He didn't get that championship the way most of us would have preferred, but what does he care? And yet, he keeps producing all these reasons that they're different. They come from different people in his camp and whoever, and he goes through apparently some sort of emotional meltdown at leaving Oklahoma City. We've discovered that in the last few days. I don't understand it. I mean, you wonder how a guy who seems to be that emotionally fragile became as strong of a player as he is. I mean, He is a basket case, and it's a good thing he's got all those guys around him, Curry and Green and Thompson, because you know it makes you wonder. What it makes you wonder is this: you know, we always sit around and talking about what must it be like to have to live with Russell Westbrook for 280 days a year. What's it like to have to live with Kevin Durant for 280 days a year if he's got this much psychosis?
Guys, the thing that, you know, he said it was, as I mentioned, childish and idiotic. The thing, and I'll sort of piggyback on what Barry's saying here. What I thought was, how childish and idiotic is it for a superstar NBA player to have multiple Twitter or Instagram or whatever accounts where he can go online and talk up himself to fans? No, I mean, I'm not trying to disparage Mr. Cole here, Mr. 16-year-old, but he's a 16-year-old kid playing, you know, Xbox in North Carolina. What does Kevin Durant care? Again, I know I'm piggybacking, but why should he care, guys? Eric, Brett, got any answers here?
I don't really see a reason why. I like the fact that, you know, social media gives us access to players and people, whether it's celebrities or people we'd otherwise never have contact with, that, you know, it kind of closes the gap between the regular people and the superstars. But at the same time, it's as simple as just walking away from it. It's as simple as closing the laptop. It's as simple as just putting your phone down. And, you know, to bring up the old Herm Edwards adage, don't press send. Like, it's just, and Kevin's explanation of what he did that night still doesn't make sense to me either, in that he was like, I remember what I sent, but then I had just woken up from a nap, so you remember what you sent, but at the same time, you kind of explain it like you were in this fog, so which one is it? Like, the explanation itself is still confusing, so I am still left in a state of Kevin Durant confusion.
Brett, what are we to make of this aspect of it? Why does he care?
When Cole Cashwell speaks, you answer. That's all I can think of.
What I love about Cole Cashwell is this: we have this sort of a picture of goofy fans. We always say they live in their mother's basement. This guy probably does live in his mother's basement. He's 15 years old.
I was kind of hoping Cole Cashwell was like John Wall or somebody. I was hoping it was like another, because it kind of sounds like it's such a cool name. It sounds kind of made up. I don't get it. I don't understand why Kevin Durant is still talking about these things in general. Remember, at some point after he left Cleveland, LeBron James created a narrative for himself that was, I needed to get away from home. I needed to go the way most guys go off to college. I hadn't done that. I needed to explore that and do my thing and branch out. Kevin Durant and his people needed to come up with a story a long time ago. Even if the story was, I don't like Billy Donovan and I had problems with the organization, they just needed to say it and stick to it. The fact that it's been a moving target hasn't done anything to dissuade people from this notion that Kevin Durant is kind of malleable, that he's waiting on other people to tell him how he feels about things because his answers change so much. He needs to find an answer, stick with it, and just stop talking about it.
You know, Eric brought this up a second ago, the things that he talked about, not having the Cats to win a title, and the roster besides Westbrook, Billy Donovan, for really the first time since Durant has left, gets dragged into this. And obviously the issue of having the teammates to win a title, we can dispute that and say that's not valid. But this Donovan stuff, Barry, this is, I mean, he brought Donovan into it for the first time, and that doesn't seem valid either.
It's a totally classless move. I mean, no matter what you think of Kevin Durant, that's classless. To throw Billy Donovan under the bus here literally 13, 14 months after the fact, when Billy coached his butt off that year. They take the Warriors to 7 games, had them down in Game 6, and it wasn't tactical incompetence that lost Game 6. It was Russell and Kevin not playing well in those last 5 minutes. That's why the Thunder didn't make the NBA Finals. So, you know, we can have fun with a lot of this, but Billy Donovan's done nothing but treat Kevin Durant with the utmost class before and after Durant became a Warrior. And for Durant to do this to Donovan, I thought was a total low class.
Also, to Barry's point, you know, when you're Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant, what the other Cats are supposed to do is exactly what they did. They put you in a position to win those games at the end. They had guys to do that. That's what you want out of guys like Steven Adams and Enes Kanter and whoever else. Those guys put your best players in position to win the game at the end. Klay Thompson had a historically epic game, and those guys didn't play great down the stretch, and that's why they lost. It's kind of a low blow to throw that on the supporting cast.
And you know, just we have to give Kevin Durant a little bit of credit. I do want to credit him for coming back and admitting to this and saying, like, you know, this was me. I said it. I apologize to Billy Donovan. I shouldn't have said that about him and the organization, but he still should get roasted for just being wrong. Like, he was wrong about Billy Donovan. He was wrong about the cats he can win with. Yes, he's winning with a group of cats that are marginally better, or not marginally, but markedly better than the guys he played with the Thunder, excluding Russell Westbrook. But Kevin Durant didn't say that he was wrong about his assessment of Billy Donovan and the team. He just said he was wrong that he said it, and he's basically saying he's wrong he got caught. But Kevin Durant's wrong, and that Billy Donovan was a pretty good coach when he had him for the 1 year, and he had a group of guys, whether it's Dion Waiters or Serge Ibaka, that were playing pretty high-level basketball against the best team in the world at the time.
Let's not forget who they did beat. I mean, we're talking about the Warriors in that series, but they beat they beat the Dallas Mavericks, a well-coached team in the first round, drummed them. Then they turn around and beat the Spurs. I think we know who coaches the Spurs, and we know who coached better in that series too, Barry.
67-win Spurs. I mean, this was one of the great Spur teams of all time, and the Thunder took them out. So yeah, the Thunder had the roster to win the title. They just didn't, and part of that's on Kevin Durant. Listen, if he wants to go leave, leave. If you like the weather better, if you like the coast, if you like the city, if you like looking at record shops in Berkeley, whatever the case may be, I don't care. But to blame individuals who did a lot for you, sort of, to me, it puts Kevin Durant in a very bad light that he'd never been in before.
Go ahead, Eric.
Well, I feel like we're just dumping on Kevin Durant, but in our defense, I suppose, and nobody really cares about our defense, we've taken up for Kevin Durant quite a bit in the past year too. But this is the last thing I'm going to say about this, is that in the year span that we've gone through, where we've heard different accounts or stories, whether it's been the Bleacher Report leak for people close to Kevin's camp saying that Russell was a reason that he left, to this story with Kevin and the tweets and some of the truths as to why he left, there has not been a lot of accountability from the Durant camp about what happened in his Thunder tenure that they didn't accomplish. There hasn't been any accountability from Durant himself saying, you know what, I screwed up in this particular series, or I messed up this particular set of plays. Everything you hear, we touched on every part of the Thunder now after this week except Kevin Durant. We've got the organization not doing what they're supposed to do in terms of going to get players or supporting Kevin Durant. We've got Billy Donovan not doing what he's supposed to do as a coach. We've had Russell Westbrook. We have a gamut of teammates that you can throw into Kevin's cats analogy or whatever. But there's just an extreme lack of accountability on Kevin's part, I think, throughout this entire year that is really the most disappointing part to me. Not that he cares what I think, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and guys, Eric and I talked about this on a Thunder update earlier this week when we were still trying to piece together who tweeted what. Was it Durant? Was it somebody else? And we talked a little bit about the fact at that point that it seemed like maybe after the finals that Durant was starting to settle into being kind of not a bad guy, but he was just going to live with whatever was out there. But then to have all this come up, Brett, it feels like what Barry said earlier, who is this guy? And what sort of mental gymnastics is he going through that he has the ring? He's the finals MVP. He won an MVP here. At what point does he just say, you know what? I'm cool with it. I can handle whatever, whatever's out there, whatever people are saying. That seems to me to be what we thought, him sort of settling into being okay with things. It doesn't seem like he really is.
Yeah, it seems like the answer to that question is never.
Yeah.
He's never going to get past it because he hasn't yet. And like Eric said, I don't want to just bag on Kevin Durant, but this is weird. It's a weird thing to be very clearly one of the two best basketball players on the entire planet. And to be this hung up with what people say about what you did, it's very, very strange. It's very strange to be this hung up on your critics. I don't get it. I don't know Kevin, but it seems odd.
Yeah. All right, guys, we've spent a good 10 or 15 minutes talking about Kevin Durant. Let's talk about the Thunder now.
Hey, let's try that.
Because preseason camp does start next week. Media Day will be on Monday. But before that begins, Sam Presti, general manager, is going to have a press conference on Friday. Barry, let's start with you. What is one question you want to be sure to ask Sam Presti on Friday?
I don't know. He's not going to answer the questions you really want to ask. So it's real. We all want to know about the contract situation with Russell Westbrook. Is he going to? What's the chances he signs before October 16th? Where's this team at in terms of the roster? Completely full. Somebody's going to have to go, in fact. But is this roster, the questions we have are this team capable of contending for the Western Finals? Nobody's really chasing the NBA championship. You're just trying to get to the West Finals. That's the carrot that you chase if you're not the Warriors. But Sam's had a great off season, but the only thing could make it better is getting Russell signed for the next 4 or 5 years.
What do you got to ask, Eric?
Well, I want to know how he feels about what Kevin said. A lot of people aren't going to want to hear it, but I figure we at least need to get some sort of reaction from him, I imagine Sam's going to take the high road and say that they're looking forward and they're worried about what's going on with the organization, and you might get a cookie cutter answer, but I'm intrigued to see what he says about that.
Eric, Brett, what do you think?
Well, those are the two big ones. I mean, that's the two real big things you want to hit. I'm still curious about just the fit together, the way this team's going to work, the way that Russell Westbrook and Paul George are going to play together. We talked about this some today. You've got a guy in Westbrook who's played with a superstar before. You got a guy with Paul George who really hasn't. What's the fit going to be like there? What did they think about when they did it, and what do they think about it now? I'm curious about the way he feels. He talked at the end of last season really about just natural progression and building on what they already had, and then he went out and got Paul George. So just curious about what he thinks of the team they've built, trying to get a sense of that beyond those first two questions, which are by far the more important ones.
I don't know how many answerable questions Sam Presti is going to have, the things that we really want to know. I think that some games are going to have to get played for us to determine what the next questions are, particularly with guys we haven't even seen play yet, like Terrence Ferguson. We don't know what to think of this guy, and I don't know if Sam Presti knows what to think of Terrence Ferguson either, whether or not he's going to spend a majority of his time in the G League this year, or he's actually going to get some run with the Thunder. So I think the preseason is going to bring up a lot more questions that we want to ask Sam Presti that unfortunately we're not going to be able to get on the record, because Sam Presti's not going to go on the record and answer these questions after tomorrow.
And one thing we can ask him about that I think will come up, ESPN did a pretty interesting story about revenue sharing and sort of the way things are going in the NBA with that, and the fact that one of the really interesting tidbits of that story is the Thunder for 6 straight years now, as a result of being really good, has paid into revenue sharing, despite the fact that it plays in one of the smallest markets in the league. So the future of that is going to be a debate going forward in the NBA. I suspect Sam Presti is going to be one of the guys who's really involved in that debate. Yeah,
lots of questions for Sam Presti, but lots of questions, as Eric brings up, in general, just about camp, a limited number of preseason games this year as the NBA tries to lengthen the regular season and thereby giving players more rest. So we're going to see fewer preseason games to start to try to answer some of these questions. I think it's a good thing that they're playing fewer preseason games, but it does sort of amp up the what are we going to know about this team. Brett, we'll start with you. What do you see as the most intriguing questions about this team as they start to practice, play those preseason games? What stands at the top of your mind?
Well, there's a couple of things. The first thing is probably just some health stuff as camp starts and preseason approaches really fast, as you mentioned. Patrick Patterson and Alex Abrinas, just kind of where are they with their knees? That's going to be a big thing. But I think as we get into those preseason games, I think the rotation stuff is really interesting. I think as long as everybody's healthy, we know that starting lineup is going to be Russell Westbrook, Andre Robertson, Steven Adams, Paul George, Patrick Patterson. What's it going to look like beyond that? Where do guys like Doug McDermott and Jeremy Grant's roles? What are those things? I think that's going to be an interesting question to start out.
Eric, what are you most curious to start to answer?
I'm curious to see if they can, sustain a level of play without Russell Westbrook or Paul George on the floor. They're going to stagger these guys once the season starts, and Paul George is going to play with that second unit, some Russell Westbrook too, and it'll be closer to the kind of dynamic they had with Kevin Durant in his final season. But is this bench any better? We'd like to think it's going to be better, but are Alex Abrinas and Doug McDermott, are those guys going to be able to step their game up with the addition of Paul George? Is Raymond Felton going to be a guy that's going to be a capable backup to Russell Westbrook at the point guard spot? So I think that second unit is something that I'm really intrigued to see how it develops, whether it's around Paul George or whether these other guys on the second unit have taken some steps in the offseason to get better.
Barry, what's your big question mark?
Oh, outside of just general curiosity, I want to see how much, these first few weeks, how much Abrinas and McDermott can play together, particularly with that second unit, but sometimes with Russ and maybe Paul George. Getting a lot of shooting on the court is critical to NBA success these days. And the Thunder has some guys that can fill it up. They're defensively challenged, but down the stretch, especially late in the Houston series, Billy Donovan found ways to play those guys together. Can he do that for extended period of times? If he can, then your non-Russ lineups more effective, better overall performance.
Guys, the thing that stands out to me, Westbrook, two things that involve Russell Westbrook. Every year we've seen him evolve. You know, it's crazy to think he's gotten better every year. So I wonder what it is this time. I mean, last year it was an MVP season. It was triple doubles. What is he better at now that he wasn't a year ago? And I also, you know, I think we've talked about this in a variety of ways. When you think about Westbrook pairing with Paul George, I know in my mind I flash back to the Westbrook-Durant pairing, and you think you know what this is going to look like. I wonder what it's really going to look like. Is it really going to look like it looked like when Durant was here? Paul George is a different type of player to some degree. But that's sort of a curiosity to me, is how much does it look familiar and how does it look different? Because I can't imagine it's going to be exactly the same. So those two things about Russell Westbrook sort of stick out in my mind. Do you guys have a sense of sort of, I mean, we haven't heard a lot from Westbrook. It's been, for as much as he's had going on, we haven't heard a lot from him. What do you guys think we might start to hear from him as camp gets underway?
Well, we know he's got a book, and we know he's got a baby. And those are the things that have really sort of dominated the latter part of it, the baby part, the fatherhood part, the whole offseason, the book part, the more recent end of the offseason. So we haven't heard him talk about basketball because he's talking to Jimmy Fallon and Ellen DeGeneres, and they're not really asking him a whole lot of contract extension and three-point shooting questions. But what I'd like to hear Russell Westbrook talk about is maybe one of those two things. Talk about maybe some consistency in his three-point shot. Yep. What you'd obviously like to see him make a leap there is in the consistency of shot selection and taking good three-pointers. If he could get his percentage up a little bit, that would be valuable. And, of course, I mean, defensively, there are always strides he can be making on that end.
Yeah. I have to think, well, I think he has to like the fact that he's going to get Paul George on his side this year. I mean, last year, for as great as he was, that was a huge, huge load to carry, Eric. And I have to think he likes the idea of seeing what this could become, what they could do together.
I'm curious to see, you know, what his style of play is going to be in the first three quarters. I think he's still going to stay in that closer role that he grew accustomed to last year for the first time in his career, really, for a full season. And I wonder how much control he's going to give up to Paul George in terms of, you know, being able to score and be the primary scorer in the offense for the first three quarters of the game, or whether it's going to be one of those systems where it's kind of similar to the Westbrook-Durant dynamic where it was Westbrook one quarter, Durant another, and they kind of alternated. So I think Westbrook being in that closer role and how good he was, it's crazy to think he could actually be better in that closer role this season because he's probably going to have more energy going into fourth quarters because Paul George is there.
How is last season going to carry over to this year, Barry, in terms of Westbrook's mentality? He knows what he can do by himself, essentially, now that he's got Paul George on this team. How does that help? How does that hurt? What sort of role does that have in your mind?
I don't think Westbrook knows. I think he's as curious as we are. He got awfully accustomed to playing next to Kevin Durant, and then he spent a year excelling but figuring it out without Durant. And now he's got a new guy in there that's, you know, similar skill set, incredible all-star. But I don't think that he knows how he and Paul George would gel. And what happens the first time that, you know, they're down one with 10 seconds left. You know, I don't know that Russell thinks he has to take every shot, but I also think he believes he can make every last shot. So, I mean, I think it's going to be an internal odyssey for these guys to figure it out. And it'll take a while. I mean, they may be successful while they're figuring it out. They may have some struggles. Who knows? But it's going to take a while for these guys to gel.
All right, we get to start getting some answers. Friday, Sam Presti's press conference. We'll have it on newsok.com and coverage following that. And then Monday, Media Day, we'll also have live coverage on newsok.com. So follow us there. And then continue as camp starts in earnest. We'll be following it the whole way. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.